Well, the first thing you do, you think you make yourself up to be this character because you live in that life. So in some way, you kind of feel like you have a buffer for that transition because you know you're going to be arrested, go to jail, and somewhat prison. At least you're thinking at some point that could happen. So you're doing all the little extreme things, not become too attached to anything, because you're going to go through that phase. But you never prepared for it. There's nothing in the world you could do to be prepared for what that experience is like. The first thing, I knew I didn't want to stay in the street. I knew it was over because I did everything I thought I could to get away anyway. So it was nothing else I could come up with that I could, be slick or maneuver around. So at that point, it didn't work out without all of the drug use, all of the drug dealing. So at that point, it was over for me, even being in the street. But getting sinners, you're numb. You have no idea what that is like. You hear it. You try and face it and deal with it, but it's a minute by minute thing. Day by day thing, and you just never know. But for myself, it was the beginning of the end, for me.
Welcome to episode 86 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact and to shine a light on all the good happening in a world often hyper-focused on the negative. Today's episode features my friend Terrence Gallman, the CEO of Gig Group, author and film producer. Terrence had a tough upbringing in rural South Carolina that ultimately led to his spending 12 years in prison. Despite that, he maintained a positive attitude and took that time to learn, ultimately landing a job on Wall Street after his release. I'm currently part of a team working with him to adapt his autobiography, Finding Me, into a feature film. Through his company Gig Group, he seeks to provide a wide range of high-exposure resume-building jobs for underprivileged communities while providing an opportunity for those communities to participate and integrate in the global and domestic financial markets. Terrence and I discuss his move at a young age from the country to a trailer park and how that ultimately led to his getting caught up in crime and drug addiction. We discuss his choice to go to rehab at age 19, the business he opened afterwards, his time in prison, and how he maintained a positive attitude there, and how he was able to learn from his experience and flourish once he got out. Here is Terrence Gallman on People Are the Answer. Terrence, thanks so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I'm excited to be here.
Likewise, really excited to have you, and it'd be great if you could start off by just telling the audience who you are, where you're based, and what your current role is.
I'm Terrence Gallman. I'm from South Carolina, Prosperity, South Carolina. I'm currently managing director, CEO of Gig Group, Gallman Investment Group. I'm currently executive producer in a film inspired by my story titled No Right Way. I have several published titles, and excited to be here with my supportive executive producer, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to dig in on the project that we're working on together. And thanks for sharing that. In life generally, what would you say motivates you?
Humanitarian efforts. I'm a big people person. I'm an underdog person, and I'm just motivated to help people. I'm inspired by other people. Generally, I'm a networker.
Absolutely. I've seen it. 100%. And, I told you I was going to go this way. Normally I start off digging into people's childhoods when we're starting the interview, but, No Right Way, the project that we're working on together that's about your life. I think we should start there because it does cover some of your childhood. And so maybe you could start off by just telling the audience what No Right Way is and about the book Finding Me that it's based on.
Well, let's begin with the great part, all right? No Right Way is a screenplay that's been adapted from my autobiography, Finding Me. Screenplay written by and with Clay Ayers, longtime writer for Quentin Tarantino. Um, Clay is an exceptional writer. So, given the caveat up front, is inspired by my story, Finding Me. Finding Me is a story that I wrote while incarcerated, facing a long, lengthy term of incarceration, and just wanted to realize, how I got to where I was and what those influences were like in my life. And I started journaling what that rediscovery was like for me. I didn't start out to be a writer. I started out journaling because I thought it was important that I wanted other people to know, where I was and what I was thinking, how I was feeling to prevent other people from finding themselves in similar situations, especially at a young age in life. And, when I realized once I got to federal prison that I was no match for that environment and time was not what I, thought I made it up to be, and the character I made myself up to be when I was in the street was just no match for that lifestyle and for the length of term of incarceration I would be there. So I started, attempt to face my fears, just wanted to reach out and identify with, things that had influenced my life. And there was nothing there. I had nothing in me, to help me sustain while I was in prison. So I had to reach out to read and find things I could do to kind of help me. And, facing, a long term, you're going to identify with leaders, that you've heard about over the years. And Dr. Martin Luther King was one of those leaders. And one of the first books that I read, and learning what his life was like facing the fears that he had faced. That became the inspirational for the book that I wrote, Finding Me, and then it just became quote and relating to those quotes, and that turned out the book Finding Me, and that's the subject of the film that we have that's written and inspired by my story, but written with Clay Ayers.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for that. And um, it digs. I've read the script. I haven't gotten the chance to read the full book yet. But obviously the script gives me a lot of insight into your life. And I know you had a pretty difficult childhood. Was that childhood in Prosperity, South Carolina?
It started there, yeah, it did.
And so, yeah, tell me what it was like growing up. I know, it was a tough childhood. You were forced into crime. What can you share about that experience?
Well, I didn't start out that way. I grew up in the rural areas of Prosperity, and it was just a great environment growing up. I grew up in the early 70s, so we was had our own community in the rural areas. We didn't see any problems, and the ones we had, we didn't know. So I was kind of isolated early on, just growing up around my, uncles and aunts, and I'm the oldest grandchild, so I was like the little brother. So I got a chance to, to hang out with them and watch, what their lifestyles were like. It was just hardworking people, arrogant age. I wouldn't even say industrial age because, my mother went into a plywood factory right, when I was 4 or 5 years old. But the more the arrogant age, so we did a lot of logging, farming. I just grew up, off the land and around the land. So I didn't necessarily have challenges there because I didn't know what the more developed communities was doing. But I moved into the trailer park shortly after that. My mom was able to buy us a single wide mobile home. I was about 7 or 8 years old, so right after kindergarten. And that was different. I got exposed there, because everybody had a household next to each other. And, that's when I started to go to town and get raised up, with some of my neighbors and things of that nature. So it did get to be challenging there simply because, even being in that era, we were still excluded from a lot of what the more developed parts of the community would be doing. And so the trailer park offered me a community within itself, socially, culturally, but it did not integrate me into mainstream society.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been a big change for you moving there. And I know that you had a good relationship with your grandparents. You also had a rough relationship with a stepfather. I don't know, how much you want to get into it, but just to, kind of give the audience an idea of, the foundation of the story.
Well, it happened kind of fast, growing up in the trailer park. We had our own culture and our own community there, but we were separate, but we still kind of network with each other. And so I got introduced to a lot of the more teenage atmosphere there. And of course, I was coming up from the rural areas. I wanted to fit in with my friends who was already living there. So they was a lot faster. And, so at that point, we began to just hang out. So it made me less accustomed to separate. It made me want to kind of find a way to want to fit in. So I started, just drinking the little beers we see left over from, the older guys in the community and, just experiment, with those things. So my mother at the time I worked, she was working, and she met my stepfather actually where she was working in the plywood factory, and kind of moved really fast with their relationship. And because I was hanging out with teenagers at the time. It was a little bit more experimental. We had tried marijuana and some of the things. We would just really be mimicking marijuana. We had this little thing called rabbit tobacco, so we would go roll it up like it was marijuana. So of course, we was already primed for when we would get our chance to really get marijuana. We was gonna do it, right? And so, I was already smoking marijuana. I was a teenager about the time, and so him and my mother, hit it off really fast, and they got married, and but he was a drug addict, and I was moving pretty fast at the time, and he was more from the city, so we ended up going to Connecticut to do some moving some furniture and things of that nature. So it was a country bar, first time, in the north, and I said, well, look, we already trying marijuana down south, and now we're seeing this, this really fast-paced, moving city life. We're only here for a weekend, so why not, right? I didn't know it at the time, but thought I was actually being introduced to marijuana, but I was being introduced to crack cocaine. And unbeknown to me that my stepfather was already an addict. And so, being in that environment, he introduced me to it. And I didn't know it at the time. We was in the back of a U-Haul. It was black, dark, 5 o'clock in the morning, right? I think it was in Bridgeport, Connecticut at the time. So it was real rough, even at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, right? And so I ended up using, didn't know it. But didn't know it. 15, 16. I think I was 16 at the time. Had no idea how addicted the drug was, and by the time I used one time there, and came home, I was already into the marijuana lifestyle, and ended up, becoming a crack. Well, I didn't become a crack. Instantly became a crack addict. Started using crack at 16, 17 years old, and from there, I used sold marijuana, eventually crack to support my habit, and just got high from 16 to about 19 years old. Ended up in rehab, 20 years old. So I was about 3.5 years a crack addict.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a really tough way to be introduced to drugs, to get hooked on them. It's super sad to hear about. And, you mentioned going to rehab at a young age. How did you make such a responsible decision at the age of, I think it was 19, right, that you went to rehab?
Well, let me go back and tell you how that became to be. Of course, immediately when I, got addicted, started using crack, of course, I was no longer at that point able to function in school. And just say that by the time I got introduced to crack, I was already on the verge of not continuing with school because it was marijuana. But at the same time, I was always a worker, so I had a great work ethic. I grew up around my stepfather, so I was always in my uncle, so I always would work. So I was actually became a teenage father in high school, and I started with marijuana. So when I went to New York, Connecticut, and actually started using, when I came home, I immediately had to support that habit. So I just started working a lot, trying to, get, a job that, like in the mill, I ended up going to work in the textile mill. So at 16, I was already, call myself being 20, 21 years old. And from there, so I was no longer in school at the time. I had actually went to Job Corps, got my GED, came home. So I'm 16 years old with my GED, but I'm in the streets. And so there was a sense of taking all the shortcuts in my life early on, but I still had some sense of being around those people who was actually doing the right thing. All my cousins, all my friends were still going to school. They was eventually going to graduate. I was in the street of crack at it, right? And so I would see them in the morning going to school while I'm been out all night getting high using drugs. So at some point, after like a 3 year binge, I owed everyone. There was nowhere else to turn. Looking in the mirror, I knew I would die an addict. And of course, crack had to have pride, So at some point, I knew I didn't want to go out and be found, after having an overdose or a heart attack or something from drug use. So I knew at that point, if I didn't get help, I was gonna die an addict. So I went to rehab. Funny thing to share with you, I went to rehab, never didn't even know what that environment was like. I just knew I needed help, right? When I went to rehab, they actually rejected me. And even though I went there as a young person, they actually thought I was functionable. And they sent me back saying, "Look, you can't come here unless you got like insurance, and it's like $1,000 a day." Luckily, I did have a job at the time, and I was able to go back and talk to my employers about, hey, I needed help. Of course, I didn't tell them exactly what I needed help for. But by the time the counselors at the rehab center talked to the employer, human resource department. They was able to get me admitted, and so it was about saving my face. That for well, first of all, is I couldn't pay anybody anymore either. And, I owed the drug users, so it wasn't nothing I could do at that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty incredible that you chose to get help, and just to circle back a little bit, you mentioned the first time you did crack cocaine, being told it was marijuana. So when you came back, like, were you aware of that, and that's what you were seeking out, crack cocaine, or just especially because I'm involved in cannabis and drug policy, and find specifically marijuana to be useful and helpful. Obviously, not the case for crack cocaine. So I'm just curious, like, what path you were on, and what eventually led you to rehab.
Yeah, I wasn't told it was marijuana. I was in Connecticut. We was actually seeking to buy marijuana, and in the process of buying marijuana, we wasn't from there, so of course you got to make a connection. We only had a couple hours to make the connection, so we actually was not able to make the connection with marijuana. Actually, we did, but the marijuana wasn't like a real potent source. We had better in the South. So my stepfather, who was a crack addict, which we didn't know at the time, we used to put marijuana and hash in these little pipes. So actually, he actually put the crack in where we would normally have the hash of marijuana. So I didn't even know I was actually smoking crack. I didn't choose to. I was actually being introduced to it and didn't even know. And that's the sort of way that addicts get other people to use too. Like, hey, try this. You'll like this, right? And so I had no defense for that.
Yeah, no, understood. That's really, really awful to hear. And but back to going into rehab. I know you met a really close friend that ended up becoming your business partner there. How did that come about?
Well, actually, we worked together. We was really we was coworkers, but we was also friends. We spent a lot of time working together on the jobs and things of that nature. Uh, and he actually um, was a part of my life when I went to rehab because they don't necessarily people around you don't necessarily use, but y'all still functionable, in a relationship. And so I ended up in rehab, and he was just one of the people that couldn't believe it because we hung out like every day, and he was like, "Man, I had no idea, you was a drug addict, you was a crack addict." And so he just ended up, being a real supportive friend. Well, he wasn't supportive in the sense of knowing how not to become codependent of what I was doing, but a friend in the sense that he was somebody I could call and talk to. And so, we stayed really close, because I was only there for a few weeks. We stayed really close, and immediately I got out, and I knew he was someone that I could be around that wasn't an addict, wasn't using, that would support me in my recovery. And so we ended up spending more time together. Plus, we had a great relationship before I went to rehab, and so we partied a lot, went to nightclubs every night, because that's one place I could function at night because you're high, so you don't have to worry about it in the daytime. You're not gonna go around people who don't use drugs in the daytime, but you could be around anybody at night, because they can't see your eyes. They don't kind of see all of the habits and things you actually pick up.
Yeah, so you and this friend ended up working together, starting a business.
Yeah, we opened up a bar, a sports bar. Because at the time I was trying to, work a lot of hours and pay people back that I owed, and I wanted a lot more freedom, a lot more flexibility, and we ended up opening a club because I wasn't getting high now. We're together every day, so we may as well, go in business together. So we owned up a sports bar, and um, still money now is not coming fast enough because as soon as I open the door, you got the dealers saying, "Hey man, where's my money? You owe me," and all of the people I owe for. And I was getting high for 3 years, so I damaged a lot of relationships. I owed a lot of people a lot of things, and so I took that business, money. In which course I didn't know anything about business, didn't know anything about, being in business, didn't know anything about, how that was supposed to work. So I just took the money I was working, making, and the money from the business, and I started hustling marijuana again, and I got right back into trying to cover all those debts that I actually had, and self-esteem got tied to that, and we just kept hustling. I kept hustling. He actually just kept watching me hustle, and we was close, but he was more of a personal supporter friend and wasn't someone who was associated with me selling marijuana and selling crack and things of that nature again.
Yeah, so it seemed like the only way to really start paying back your debts was to, be doing illicit business, despite having, the legal business as well. And that makes sense. I mean, it's unfortunately a very tough situation, and um, what you ultimately did end up, getting sentenced to prison. What was sort of the downfall? What led to that?
Well, it was easy, when you don't see yourself when you're in the streets and when you're doing things to get away with, but everybody else can see it, no, So a young black man opened up a business, sports bar downtown Main Street, Newberry. That was a no-brainer for them. I wasn't in their social circles. They never saw me in the business alliance to champ things I had no idea about. I'm just a hustler and thinking that I see a for rent sign, I could just go put a deposit and go buy things, get in there, said they know nothing about business license, retail license, taxes. So it was really easy. They had the law enforcement on me the day I actually uh, went looking in the window for the place for the most part, right? Because the neighbors, businesses are actually trying to protect their business and the integrity of the whole downtown area. But so I actually, it was over before it began for me. Um, and the street money, the hustling money, wasn't necessarily tied to the business money, but the business was almost still part of my self-esteem, trying to, get away from the streets, trying to get away from the drug use and drug dealing, so almost like a self-esteem thing, and just really what they say when the fish get out of the frying pan into the fire. So I got out of the streets and got right into the fire by going downtown, opening up a business. So it was over, when I first got
Understood. And, remind me about your sentencing. I have a note. I don't know if this is accurate based on some conversations I've heard, but that you were sentenced to 19 years.
Yeah, I played out actually 16 to 19. And the guidelines, is where they find a base and then you get enhanced. So then the enhancements is how you get the rest of the time. And the enhancements is based on your prior convictions. And of course, it was really easy for me to have marijuana convictions, simple possession, those type of things, because it's like we didn't think nothing of it, especially, being an addict. No, not that I had those, but I'm just saying it. Some of the little things that I had that I overlooked became part of that sentencing phase, and yeah, so my minimum was 16 to 19, and ended up with a 27-year sentence. However, 16 to 19 was what I pled to.
And, what were you thinking when you got that sentence, and what was your feeling going into prison?
Well, the first thing you do, you think you make yourself up to be this character because you live in that life. So in some way, you kind of feel like you have a buffer for that transition because you know you're going to be arrested, go to jail, and somewhat prison. At least you're thinking at some point that could happen. So you're doing all the little extreme things, not become too attached to anything, because you're going to go through that phase. But you never prepare for it. There's nothing in the world you could do to be prepared for what that experience is like. The first thing, I knew I didn't want to stay in the street. I knew it was over because I did everything I thought I could to get away anyway. So it was nothing else I could come up with that I could, be slick or uh, maneuver around. So at that point, it didn't work out without all of the drug use, all of the drug dealing. So at that point, it was over for me, even being in the street. But getting sentenced, you're numb. You have no idea what that's like. You hear it. You try and face it and deal with it, but it's a minute by minute thing. Day by day thing, and you just never know. But for myself, it was the beginning of the end for me. I had no idea who I was or what I was until I got sentenced, because that's when you start to identify with who you really are as a person, what your relationships are really like in life, what your role and responsibility in life. And for me, like I said, I got introduced to drugs by, you know, crack by my stepdad. So I wasn't out, first of all, to be a drug dealer, I became a drug user before I became a dealer, to be honest. And so it was easy for me to not want to try to cement myself in that mindset and lifestyle. Like this was going to be a way of life for me. It was actually the beginning of when I started trying to figure out how I was going to prevent this from being the rest of my life. And when you get that type of sentence at a young age, you do know that eventually you could get out, But at the end of the day, you gotta live, survive to make it, to get out. And doing a long prison sentence is it's serious.
In at what point after you went in did you have sort of this relatively positive growth mindset? I want to prepare for a life after this. Like, is that something you started with right away, or did you develop that over time?
No, actually, I thought about that. I never the pride thing that I had with going to school. So the first thing I did was say, look, even though I had a GED, I said, look, I want to go back and reacclimate myself to that person I were prior to me getting introduced to drugs. And so the first thing I did was enroll into the basic uh, education classes because I wanted to identify with that person that I was before I spent this life of getting high, using drugs, and eventually selling drugs. And so that was the first step, and I was able to um, use that as a buffer in my early stage of my first few months. But it get mundane pretty fast when you realize it's just basic math and English, and now you still got to do something with yourself the rest of the day in prison. And so it was just that started me, and then it was religion too. I grew up with my stepfather. He was a key guy in the church and the community, so I was always had faith that I could turn to, and it was a great body of brothers that was actually Christian brothers that was there that actually insulate you when you get to prison, especially if you're young. They're going to be there to give you a hand up when you get there, give you, some support. And so that was, my two buffers that I had going in, and that helped me make that early transition. It still wasn't no match for what we had to deal with on a daily basis, but
Yeah.
I had good buffer. And I come from a pretty supportive family too. My mother being the only child, it was tough, but it was still, I had a good bond.
Yeah.
So I wasn't so empty, when I got there.
And you went through so many hardships before you did get there, and we have talked about you've maintained this positive attitude, and it sounds like you're saying that your religion and your family are sort of what allowed you to do that.
Yeah, because they wasn't part of my drug use and my drug dealing. Like I said, you kind of try to protect those people that are close to you as much as you can. So they wasn't a part of what I was doing. At least I didn't think they were, but they were very codependent on my lifestyle. But you don't see that when you're at it. You just selfish, right? And so, and so, um, yeah, they were there to give me that support.
And at what point during your sentence did you decide you were going to start learning about finance?
I think at some point you have to program down. So when you get in those high security institutions, you have to take these courses in class in order to program where you can get like to ultimate what everybody want to go to as a federal prison camp. And so you have to take these courses in order to program out, and you have to be below 10 years. So at the point, that eventually you're gonna, you don't know that you think you're eventually gonna get there to the chance that you can go. So you start taking those courses, and it was a counselor that I signed up for intro to finance course and an anger management course, right? So you have to choose two. And so he came in and said, "Look, it was about 6 or 7 of us in the room, and he said, "Look, I'm going to, if I'm going to teach you something, give you guys something, I'm going to give you something that I would use on the street." And he brought us the course Rich Dad Poor Dad, um, and by Robert Kiyosaki, and just showed that what the poor middle class don't know about money that the rich do. And so one of the courses, well, no, throughout that course, it just showed me that I had no idea about money, I had no idea about finance. I was in the street and hustling, and I didn't know what to do with the money other than count it. You know what I mean? If it's illegal, you couldn't take it to the bank. You can't go get anybody to help you with it, right? And so I knew then at some point that I I was a byproduct of economic exclusion because again, you can get the education, you still ain't gonna get the opportunity, in the communities, when you challenge, you know. Um, and so I started just reading, his books and everything he referred us to, and anything I could get my hands on after that. And simultaneously, I noticed that while I was there, there was other groups that was actually studying and reading majority only business material, right? And so while I would read this and read about these communities, then I would look over and sell next door, and I would see guys who are actually coming from the business community to federal prison. And so I started putting two and together. I was like, wow. So if I'm reading the book about this community and these guys are already here, so I started reading and then I started networking, right? And and so it became to be, an opportunity for me to really, really, learn and get some hands-on experience from guys who actually had the experience that I was reading and learning about it. So um, I got a very unorthodox intro to finance.
It's thoughtful of you to have, learned and networked with those individuals, and trying to learn the business from people that had been there, despite where they ended up. And um, I'm curious, like, how. Tell me about the time from when you were focused on finance to when you eventually were able to leave prison.
I'll share with you interesting part about the group of guys that I was able to study. And I moved around. I was in 4 or 5 different federal institutions, so you got to find a community everywhere you go. But particularly, uh, I noticed that also I had this fear early on that if I'm serving a long prison sentence now, and eventually I could spend the rest of my life in this environment, right? So the first thing you do is trying to fix that initial problem that you have from being a drug user to drug dealer, and now you serving a long prison sentence, which is so easy to end up, right back in the same environment when you get out, and now you're back in prison for the rest of your life. In this case, I'm blessed with an opportunity that I'm even gonna possibly make it out this time, possibly just from the sentence wise. And so you think about that, you can overcome not wanting to do what you did to get here. And the first thing people tell you, if you can sell drugs, you can run a business, right? And so you start thinking that, okay, well, I got to get out and I'm going to start or be a part of a business. In reality, I'm starting to see business people come to prison. So I'm like, wow, and they're not black. So I'm like, so it's kind of get a little bit discouraging because you're thinking that that was the one thing that you could hang your hat on every day to say, look, I'm not going to be a drug dealer, drug user. I'm going to go out and I'm going to, start a business. So you're already limited because you can't get education, while you're there. Now you're starting to see that more people that don't look like you that's coming from the business community. And then I realized how easy it is for people to end up in prison, and so at that point, it just made me want to lock in and start really, really focusing on getting some fundamentals in place so that I could, navigate and network at the same time.
And after how many years were you released?
Actually, I served 12 years.
You served 12 years.
Yeah, and
It's a long
so
time.
this was, man, is it? And I've been out long as I was in, and and I can only think about people who don't have, and that's what's so great about us working together. I think about what I did know, and what's the chance of someone ever coming into the knowledge and understanding of what they can know to prevent themselves from being in that situation, or to find their way once they're in there. So having this opportunity is extremely great for me. It's probably the highlight of my entire career. For the purposes that we come from these different communities, and we're finding a way to be together on people are the answer. And you think about it, you don't realize that you are part of the solution. You can find these problems in every household, but together, collectively, we're part of the solution. And so that the time in prison was, I mean, it was long, it was daunting, it was, I mean, it's serious. You don't think of how serious it is when you're before you get there or when you're there, but when you think about that, this can become repetitive in your life. That's when you really start to pay attention that, hey, if I ended up there as a teenager, right, in my a young stage in life, and you don't get all these things right in life, and now you're more vulnerable to that again, in any aspect of your life. So it kind of, forced me to want to begin with these moments in mind, even during then, during that time. So yeah, it's a long time, 12 years, and it became to be uh, just a great motivator, at the same time, because you think, if I didn't go through that, then I wouldn't be where we are now. And then, so many other people could benefit from, what we're doing now.
I mean, it's a great perspective to take, and it's great that you're able to take that perspective that you can learn from the experience, and it can take you where you are now. And I think a lot of people would come out jaded, so I think it's really impressive that you feel that way, and certainly something others should take as an example. And I'm curious. You learned a lot of finance while you were inside. What was your sort of first move when you got out?
Well, actually, trading. I didn't know how long it was. I had sat so long in prison. I thought it was easy sitting at a desk, watching a computer screen. I thought that would be nothing, right? But when that door is not locked, it's kind of hard, to sit there. You want to see the world, right? And so, you know, trading was first, and I wanted to do some more hands-on things. Went to from there. The market had all of those challenges. So I got out in 2008, and that's when we had the crash, right? Right? So I'm like, man, I got my whole life built up for this moment, right? For these opportunities, and here the whole bottom go out, right? And so, yeah, so that was first, and so at that point in time, I said, well, look, I got to diversify this finance thing, and went from there, real estate and car, trucking. So just kind of bounced around in consulting, and at some point, I knew after seeing exactly what was going on in society with the criminal justice system, I knew then I owed the community that I actually damaged, in a lot of ways. And so I could not just be successful doing finance, and it wasn't in a way in the relations to the community that actually, I took advantage of. I would say that.
And then when you decided, you needed to go and back and help the community, what did you do? Were you living in South Carolina through all of this? Did you move around?
Yeah, I've been in South Carolina the whole time. I've been on, consulting work, so I'm all over the place for the most part. Um, but the funny part is that I actually started an organization called the Challenge for Change Initiative when I realized that, look, it's an initiative that you got to take, and it's a challenge to take that initiative for change, right? And so it kind of became more of a self-help, self-therapy type of effort for me, because I wanted to find a way to communicate to people because I knew what it's like to, be a suspect. And so a lot of these uh, situations that have been going on in the media had a lot to do with people um, trying to learn about what it's like to be that suspect, even though you haven't done anything wrong or you may not be the target, for whatever's going on. But if you still don't know how to de-escalate that situation with law enforcement, it only poses a bigger problem because even in excluded communities, you don't see law enforcement the way that people who are part of their community see them, right? And so you police your own community, So if you're not dealing with the issue, you don't know how to deal with somebody from the outside who come in to deal with that issue, right? And so I knew I owed the young people, like myself, what that experience was like from my point of view. And so I started the nonprofit, and I knew I had actually wrote the books while I was in. Actually, I forgot about them because I had so much going on that I said, well, look, I gotta publish the books to let people know I do know something about this subject matter. So my books became like my resume and my business card, right? And so I went with the nonprofit and the books into the community to get support and help. And it was a challenge. I didn't know how much, how daunting the task for criminal justice inform. Well, I started with reform, and I said, well, look, I got to change it to inform, right? Because nobody really wanted to touch that subject. When I went out into the communities, I had no idea that everything was pro law enforcement, everything was pro system. Like, just call the cops, just call the police, and I was like, wow, like, yo, nobody got a chance at fixing these issues because they probably got more than enough going on as we speak, right? And so now you're sending law enforcement to a community who don't have a relationship with them, right? And then the community that they're going into are not, in a position where they can de-escalate the situation because they probably got more than just that situation that they're dealing with. And so everything is already at the head when they come into each other. So I thought that we could be, proactive about being prevention, we could give ourselves an opportunity to address this issue. And that's why it was so important when I saw what you do and what you've been doing. I mean, it's been such a great motivation for me because, again, you don't see a lot of people, with platforms like yourself actually, you know, spearhead, inform campaigns. It's mostly most people reacting when things happen.
If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. And just knowing the hardships that happen within the criminal justice system, knowing how disproportionately our laws have been enforced, especially racially over the years, has certainly been a motivator for me. Having grandparents that survived the Holocaust, and it's always been just the idea of certain groups being marginalized, and the idea of certain groups just getting focused on and not being able to live free lives is just really sickens me. So it just motivated me to get involved in criminal justice reform. I think that our system is such a mess, and there's so many people inside that don't need to be, and there's so much potential in all of these people that we're letting go to waste. And meanwhile, the system itself is not rehabilitative as it should be, as it is in places like Scandinavia. And so I think, we've certainly got a lot of work to do. And I think it's amazing to have met you. And you're an incredible shining example to people that, are put into situations that lead them inside, that can come out and have a better life. It's inspiring, and I hope that you continue to inspire others.
Well, thank you. And I would be honest and tell you, I didn't really see myself as an opportunity with helping others. I just knew that, yeah, I wanted to help myself. Because even through those experiences, you still got to keep going. Nobody's empathizing, sympathizing with you. And I appreciate what you're sharing because again, when I started reading Dr. King, I had no idea that, his civil rights was actually inspired by communities that didn't necessarily look like him. And then, I started Gandhi and Nehru, and then I started looking around the world and, even coming to when I, reached out for help in the community, one of the first people I, went online. I actually went on LinkedIn and met Vincent Cole, who's an Irish civil rights activist and grew up on the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King, inspired by the Irish and the British troubles. And, told me that he was inspired by, Dr. King, and I'm like, wow, I don't think I ever heard a white person say he was inspired by a black person in my life. Like, I never saw that. I'm from a town where it's only 1,100 people. We have, relationships, but for the most part, to say a whole community or country that actually got inspiration from the black community, I said, man, I wonder how that would look if every young black male or female around the country understood that they've inspired people, around the world. And Vincent even shared with me, he said, look, and me and the British can look alike. So y'all have y'all can address what you're dealing with. We don't even know who our enemies are at times, right? And so it just made me relate to what you're saying. And when I did start looking at what any community go through when they're dealing with exclusion, um and all the names that we can call, man, my heart goes out to it, and I knew it at some point. And I go back and I identify what I did. I try not to make myself out to be anybody special, but I go back, and looking at just the part of me playing, even though I use drugs, and part of me dealing with drugs. And I think to be in prison, and I read about Dr. King and he being locked up, for just protesting. I mean, speaking out. I mean, you can call it for what it is. I mean, we're not in the, we're not the best of everything that we make ourselves out to be. We have the best of opportunity though. I'll say we primitive. I'll take it to say that, look, I'll say we develop, in some aspect, but in other areas, in terms of humanitarian opportunity, we're primitive. We haven't even started, what it really takes to realize that, your neighbors, children is just like your own. So I feel it and I sense it. And being in federal prison, you meet people from all different walks of life. And when there's a food strike, when there's a riot, when there things go down, I mean, you're there together. You got to try to look for that. That whatever little thing you could get to help each other out. At some point, I mean, certain places you go is really racially divided. But that's anywhere. But for the most part, when the storms really come, you need to stick together. You need to come together to try to fix it. So I can empathize. I really feel what you're sharing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And You know, certainly you're an inspiration to many, and you know, since you first saw that, I think there's obviously been tons of Black people that have been tremendously impactful and inspiring, and so you know, appreciate all the effort that you've gone through to get where you are. And you know, you mentioned your books were kind of like your calling card, you know, showing that you know what you're talking about. And I know you mentioned, you know, writing Finding Me while you were inside. I believe you have two other books as well as a screenplay. Can you tell me how those came about and just a little bit about them?
Yeah, I didn't write to be a writer. Like I said, the story's happening, and I wrote them for more of a coping thing. So the Love's Journey, the Road Less Travel was a teenager. That was just a hot young male, you know, being separated from the world. So that's the whole imaginary thing that you can come up with to cope with being incarcerated, right? In your 20s and your 30s, and then you may, you know, may not never see those dates. Well, you're not going to see them again in your life, right? So I did everything I could do with that one. And Finding Me, of course, that was when things started to get really serious for me while I was incarcerated. And I started realizing I was bitter, but I had to channel it somewhere. So I wrote it because I realized how people around the world would know I could actually be in this situation, but I didn't know until I got here. And so it made me feel, you know, I was bitter, felt excluded. And so I wrote it. And then, you know, I published those two. And after this, you know, my journey in finance and the people I've connected with, the places I've been, you know, with Vincent, you know, starting with the international community, uh, and you know Bloomberg, the United Nations, Global Private Equity Conference, even as a late super return. So it had been a journey. So I wrote Wall Street Bond, the Urban Renaissance, because I wanted to show the urban community, you know, how money, you know, somewhat moves out here in society because we're not in those rooms, we're not part of that conversation. And so I wrote it because it's, you know, something happened to me. I wanted them to at least be introduced to, you know, the financial markets. And I started my company again, Gig Group, so that I could actually be a fund that would actually invest alongside these institutional investors and other funds out here, so they can kind of earn while they learn. You know, we could be visible, be fully transparent to give them opportunity to learn how finance really work as we network too. So that was a big deal for me. Um, and the screenplay came, you know, after connecting with Clay, because he was a keynote speaker for all Los Angeles County correctional institutions, and his upbringing with Quentin Tarantino, and I knew he could identify with our community, and he instantly did. He taught, you know, a lot in the criminal justice system out there. So I was able to get the screenplay written, you know, which was part of the marketing I wanted to do. So not only my story, but my company, I will be visible, will give access to the financial market because it lands on Wall Street. It's a really inspirational story from, you know, about my life, inspired by my life, and you know, show what we're doing now. And the funny part, we're making the movie, you know, and this is part of it. I mean, I can just be honest with you. This is, you know, this is the movie for me. You know, this is the journey. Um, and so that screenplay, No Right Way, we got, you know, like yourself, executive producer on it. We got David Will, former vice chairman of the NASDAQ, who chaired the Jobs Act, with President Obama signing into law and legislation. Um, so we have, you know, key people. We just again got Anthony Hemingway on the project with us, who's the producer, director, directed The Wire, Empire, Red Tails. So Genius with Aretha Franklin. So we have the people that we want to work with on the production now to move things forward and to move this story and this whole effort into mainstream media, mainstream community, so that those people who are maybe sitting on the sideline who don't know that they could be a part of what we're doing to become part of it. And so we're doing two things at one time. So I'm introducing people to finance with my company, you know, for an investment opportunity, just so that they can learn and be a part of the networking community who are actually changing communities all over the world by, you know, with the way they're investing in those communities. So if you can, you know, educate yourself and kind of arm yourself, you can attract those investments. And then, you know, I'll quote one of the comments I seen just not so long ago. It said, first, you're a product of your community. I've always agreed with that statement. And he took a few more seconds and then he said, then your product, your community is a product of you. So, I understand the first part. That was up to me being almost 50, right? So now it's about time that I make my community a product, a byproduct of who I am now. Um, so I'm thankful to have the opportunity to work with the people who have become part of what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome to see the platform that you've built for yourself, and the opportunities that you've been able to give others. And I would love to learn a little bit more about Gig Group and what you guys do. I know you mentioned a little bit already, but you started it in 2012. What was its origin, and how has it evolved?
I started because I actually wanted it to be just for what we're doing now. It's strictly for entertainment. So it was never exposed, and it was built for this opportunity. My ultimate goal was to, funny thing was to create, was to have a co-branded debit card, right? So I wanted to put a co-branded debit card into every young person's hand because I wanted a financial marketplace where they could go, and as they do their financial transactions, they would actually learn about how finance works. So it's more built for prevention because that once you learn about finance, then you kind of see the true value that you have. You rather make 60,000 with your life on the street than pay somebody 60,000 to watch you in prison, right? And so and so my marketplace will be partnered with people who will help us and help them integrate themselves into the financial market as a means of prevention from the economic side. At the same time, partner with people who are working in the space to teach them criminal justice prevention. So Gig Group has been built just for this opportunity. It was nothing else I wanted to do with it other than to use it as an opportunity to educate people on how markets really work, how investing really works.
Got it. Well, that's a great thing to teach people. Certainly a wonderful motivator and something that can change lives. I mean, even for myself, obviously coming from a very different background, but also in South Carolina, one of the only classes from high school that I think back to is a finance class that I had senior year, where just a lot of the basics I know of financial, how to operate became from that class. And I still think back to it. And, for better or worse, I don't necessarily think back to the random 10th grade English class, but I do think about Mr. Murrah's finance class my senior year. And I think it's lost in our society. We're not teaching young people enough how to handle finances. And meanwhile, our economy is drastically changing all the time too. So I think, it's so helpful to give young people the tools that they need to sort of operate in our world and our economy.
Yeah, you have to know it early when you're young, so it becomes second nature to you. And because we're in a space where everything is digital, we could be in that space together. Um, we got access to everybody. Like globally, we can be all over the world at the same time, right? And so, but you could be in a community and you don't understand how an institution works. I'll share that that was more of what my initial motivation was starting out, and then I realized that before you can help someone else, you have to help yourself. And I realized I was able to get in certain spaces that the subject wasn't quite social yet at the time. So I feel like, I just need to keep going. And the more I keep going, eventually, we could be where we are. And that's the funny thing. Like we're right there. I mean, if I was to try to explain it in a way, it wouldn't work. Like it was intended for everything to happen the way that it's happening. Like, and if I were to try to change the story, try to make it about me instead of about, it would not be, what it really is. It wouldn't be true to it. And the help have come. And that's the great part about it. And you mentioned Gig Group, and what my inspiration was and where we are in that space. I even have more material that, through my company that we can source from, writer like Clay, th- what's the chance of that even happening, in our society, to connect with someone who's iconic, who, even rep for, with Keanu Reeves, for someone who haven't been in this space and to work with him, so I think this is it. I think it's right here where we are. I think it's who we are. And then we connect and, you being from Charleston and, your family and the work you've done in the community, so reputable, well known, well respected, and to see you're doing in the film space and to see what you're doing and now read the podcast, like people on the outside are like, wow, like You know what I'm saying? Because you wouldn't go, you go all around the world to think that you got to go somewhere else to solve what you think you want to address. And if someone right there in that same space is working in that way and being, effective and efficient, and so I would honestly say there's no other way to speak about it. I think the time is now. I think it's in us now. I do know that to leave it on a kid to go out in the community to pull themselves up out of something that I'm learning late in life as well. So I have to look at these young people, as if though where I was when I was at their age in life, and you feel like you're indestructible. The rules are the last thing. Being transparent is the last thing. And now they got access to more information, more influence than ever, and we have to be mindful that that's the opportunity they're going to take, and we
Yeah.
can put something out that they can become part of. I think just as inspirational and don't have those elements, but it addresses those elements.
Yeah, 100%. And excited to continue working together on No Right Way. So the audience is aware. We're relatively early stages. We have a draft that we're editing right now that's in a really good spot, and we brought on Anthony Hemingway to direct and produce, who's going to be incredible. And we're going to do everything we can to get this project made. It's going to take some time, but really excited to help get your story out there.
Yeah, and again, that's why it's our story. You know what I mean? Just what you said. I think also you add the part of things being contemporary. I think that bringing it up to speed with where we are now, uh, minimum bioptic, is really huge for me because it shows all of the influence and the elements that makes the story. Then this part is visible, just as visible, parallel with the story. Even maybe I've been begging you to get a cameo in it as well, right? And so I just think that there's so many intricate pieces that have been so instrumental in the story. Why not, man? Why not? Why not chart
Yeah,
that angle that it have given us to really put a stamp on, and again to give South Carolina in the world. And I
yeah.
just say South Carolina because some of it is based here, but I would love to get that global element. We got Vincent Coyle, like I said, that plays such an instrumental piece. And I think the great part about this story is that people can see themselves in it. I think in wherever community you're coming from, I think you can identify with it. And I think that makes it more important, make it more relevant. I think it more inclusive, and I do know it'll be really efficient in the communities because they're dealing with these subjects in and out every day, and there's so many people also. And I like to look at the people who went through the system and that are part of it. I think we all affect and touch in some aspect of our lives. We can identify with it. But you also want to empower those people who've been in the system that can help in their communities and identify with what they've been going through or have went through. And so it's not socially unacceptable to share with people what your experience was. Because you think about it, I look at your story and the statement made from your father, and that's what we want to do. As parents, give our kids those pieces that they can build their place in life with, and have that connectivity to our lives and it be an extension for what they want to do with their lives. So I find that other guys who had similar experiences, because again, some of the key guys who influenced my life early on gave me, that momentum to sustain. And I think we
Yeah.
overlook that coping system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important. And speaking of, empowering and influencing and inspiring younger people, throughout your time, have you had anyone that's been a particularly impactful mentor to you?
Yeah, sure. Sure. One of my really close friends, Paul Tate, he's an elder in the community, and it's been a hard subject. He went to school and graduated, college in the '70s, and so we have 15, 20 year age difference, and just us, going through communicating, with this subject back and forth, over the years. It's been a great mentor, personally and professionally. So yeah, I've had that now more so than ever in my life. First you want to stay excluded. You kind of want to stay out the way. You don't want to be. You've been around people all so long, so much, and you get out. You want to have that space, but in this particular case, you definitely need somebody to hold your hand to help
Yeah.
get you through, challenging times out here.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's a lot to learn out there, a lot the world will throw at you. So any ammo you can have going in is super helpful. And um, yeah, if you'd like, now's the point where you can ask me a question.
Yeah, I look at what you're doing with your podcast, and not why you started, but to you doing out here what was so instrumental in my life when I was inside. How do it feel to take in, someone else's world and then have the opportunity to re-communicate that to other people across the space because you take it in, but then you got to become part of that world in order to get other people to help identify with that. What's that experience is like? Because I take all in. I don't get a chance to give out. It's all about me, right? And so it's the opposite with you. And I try to feel, I think about that because I watch all of the shows that you do, and everybody got a world in itself. And you get
Yeah.
a chance to experience all of those worlds, and then you have a lot of patience as well, because you have to have a lot of patience knowing that somebody else don't know something that you do, and then you get a chance to what does that feel like when you get a chance to give to the world, give back?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. It's certainly been awesome getting to do this podcast, getting to learn some of these stories. And, initially the concept was I've been meeting all these tremendous people doing amazing things. How can I help get their stories out there? And also, like, how did they become these people that are driven to do this, that are driven to give back? So, I take each interview as a learning experience, for myself as well as for the audience. I want to know how this person became who they are, what drives them to be, you know, and do what they do. And it it's great to have a platform to share that with the world. I think that, like you're saying, seeing sort of the intricacies within each life, just, I don't know, I think it gives us all a different perspective. And for me, just always tries to make me self-aware of other people's perspectives in certain situations. And yes, I'm honored to be able to share these stories with the world and hope that, even if they change one life, just by hearing the story, which, been fortunate to get a couple of comments like that. It just goes such a long way. And I hope to be able to grow the platform so that we can get these stories out to more and more people. But it's something that I both, enjoy and feel honored to do. And I learn an incredible amount from.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the opportunity. And more so, I think the person that your platform helped you become, that it's not enough of you. Is you, but it's not enough for you. But at the same time, I think the more people hear that people are the answer, I think that it made me think more and more about it as we built up to the show, and I got more and more excited about it. Then I thought about listening to the other podcasts and stuff, and I just thought about, when we get a chance to reflect, we can identify with any other person. And I think that's where our saving grace is when we don't identify with other people and we think that that pain is their pain. I'll tell you something I did hear one time. A guy, while I was inside, said, he said two things in this life. One thing, people can't see your dreams and they can't feel your pain. And so it makes me feel so honored to be share things that you do and people you do it with, because I know that we have to do it together in order for it to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, speaking of, an opportunity to reflect, I think it very much provides that for whoever I'm interviewing. A lot of people don't take the time to pause and think about where they are and how they got there. And so I think some of the people walk away being more appreciative of themselves. And I think, loving and caring for yourself is so important to success. So I like to think that I'm giving somebody a little bit of space to think about all of the work that it's taken to get them where they are.
But that's a master class. That's the course right there. I think that people are the answer, and I think you can find your answer in that. And I think that what you're doing is a way that we all can identify with where we are, how we got to be where we are. And I think you can take those moments to think. I think in that space, you can not only become more of a better person, you can become more of an effective person in any space that you're in as well. So I think I like to share. I like to get more involved with what you do and how you do it, to so that other people can have the same opportunity. You know, it stopped me in my tracks to think about, yeah, we're gonna do this, but what's really happening now is that everybody could take this time to do what we're doing here, and I think if we can find a way to share that with people, I think it will be great help too as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting perspective. Appreciate you sharing it. And, um, I've only got a couple more for you. The first one being, aside from family, if everything were to end tomorrow, whatever that means to you, what are you most grateful for or most proud of?
Then I did not give up. You know, I'm so grateful that I didn't quit. You know, in the daunting moments, the fears I faced them. You know, and I'm just thankful that I didn't allow those fears to force me to retreat. You know, the rejections and the lack of support, those things. You know, I feel really honored and great that I personally was able to face them and to continue to go and grow from it. You know, I didn't see them as a learning opportunity for me then, but they became the most inspirational and instrumental pieces and places in my life was those things that was not just a green light. You know, but that yellow light caused me to get better, to find another way and to get more motivated. So I'm just thankful that I just didn't stop.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thankful for that as well. And um, so the big one that I make sure to ask everybody, if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
I would say discretionary discrimination because we don't know a lot of times we'll discriminate. You know, we think we'll just not um we're not sympathizing with someone or empathizing with someone. When I say discretionary discrimination, it puts us in that space where if it's not us, then it don't affect us. It's not our problem. And I think when we choose to discriminate using that discretion, I think we fail ourselves and we fail our society. I'll give you a quick story about something that highlights this for me. I was in a camp and there was a guy came in from a well-to-do community. He had gangrene in every aspect of his body because he'd been so wealthy so long. He ate the best food, drank the best wine, smoked cigars his whole life. I mean, like, and he was probably early 50s, but you could tell he had done everything he could do with his life in that time span, right? And he was okay with that. So he came in, oxygen tank and everything else, and barely could breathe. And so of course, if you're in an institution and somebody passes, they're gonna investigate it because they take away your visits and all those other things while you investigate the death. And so, but in that space, nobody wants to lose the business and lose our freedom. So everybody kind of cater to the person who need any help. So if you need any kind of food, water, medicine, anything, we just try to help. So this individual was able to, after a few weeks, sit up, you know, on his bunk, and eventually we got him outside where he was able to get some sun and start getting life into, back into his body. And the first good chance he could start talking, he said, "Listen, if they were gonna send me to prison, at least they should have sent me one where my peers were." And so everybody looked around and was like, "We are your peers, bro. Like this is it." He was like, well, he thought that he would have went somewhere that would have been more, I would say, white collar or whatever the case was. Like, whether it's this kind of crime or that crime, bro. When you're here, we're all one. We're the same, right? And so after he did his time, 3 months went by, he was able to walk, and 6 months went by. Now he's on the track. He got functionality in every aspect of his body. 18 months, he's actually running the track now, so he's back like he never went down in his life, right? And so it came time for him to leave, and he was just so connected with everybody. He was almost like, he's like, I'm gonna leave, but a part of what has transpired in this environment is a part of my life now. And so I think that those are the things that I always look at, is that you never know what someone else is going through or dealing with until you put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
And that experience and these experiences, the ones that help me identify with that. And so that's why I like the movie Crash, I watch Crash because it just give me those moments that I can see somebody else in a situation that you don't think you'll be in. But then if you was in that situation, you probably would handle it sort of the way they do, it may not just be as good. So I try to, always think about when I choose to um, discriminate. And when
Yeah.
I think about the discretionary discrimination, that we're picking and choosing what we get engaged in and who we allow to fight these battles on their own. So I always follow what you're doing. I can appreciate you doing it, and I can kind of see the genius in it.
I appreciate that, and that was certainly an interesting story, and it's incredible to hear how his perspective changed because of the situation that he was forced into.
Yeah. And I always keep that in mind, and that helps me go across the aisle to people too, because sometimes they may not even know. So if something is not happening, you don't leave it for that person who may not know, but at least if you can engage that person, you give them that opportunity, and I think that makes us better as a person, as a community as well.
Absolutely. And, it's been great having you on the show and learning about your story. And I'm sure others are as inspired by you as I am. How can people listening support you and your impact?
Yeah, I think where we are right now. I know, following and sharing and interacting us with on social media, because we're all in that global space. We can do more online than we possibly can do physically right where we are. So sharing what we're doing, participating in what we're doing, support the people who support us. We're, early stage as a company. We're about to make things more visible. Again, like you said, where we are, we're in the early stage with the project, with the rewrite, things to get things in a better perspective in terms of the script. We're in a good place in terms of the team that we're having, that we're building. We want to be, good steward of support. So, just want to be calculated about how we, get people involved in from what aspect. But for the most part, we try to be as visible as we can be and transparent on social media.
Awesome. Well, we'll be sure to share all those links with the audience. And, thanks so much for sharing your story. I can't wait for us to, bring it to the screen and share that with the world.
Yeah. It's gonna be amazing. Again, I tell you, man, we're making the movie. So I think if we can start engaging some of the small things, amongst ourselves, I think it's gonna be monumental. It's equal as monumental as the film. So I don't take these opportunities for granted. I don't take nothing that we're doing for granted, because I can tell you, it's exciting. It's exciting to see, because I can also look at where things come from, and I can see where we are now, and it just makes the moments, they get grander and grander, every day. They're getting bigger and better, and almost as if I say, look, if I don't make a movie about making the movie, then I'll miss the movie, because these are the opportunities that you want people to know about. So I appreciate this opportunity. I appreciate you sharing all that you do, the team of people that you work with. I think it's monumental. Um, I know we'll be able to, go great places and do great things. And, there are people in places right now that are being inspired by everything we're doing, and everything we're going to do is just gonna, I think it's gonna be transcending for a lot of people in places and spaces that they're in.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for your time, and look forward to talking again soon and to sharing your story.
Well, thank you, brother. I look forward to it. And again, read for the script, because again, I told Anthony, I only want, two things from the whole project. That's you and David. So I hope we can transcend that cameo thing into real life, man. That would be the highlight of everything for me. So yeah, let's just keep fighting for that.
Yep, I'm up for it.
All right, brother. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with friends, and reviews or subscriptions on your favorite platforms go a long way to help the show grow. I want to share these incredible people and their remarkable work with as many others as possible. Thanks for your support. For more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.